Hello, everyone. Welcome to HUMED, Human Medicine. This is your host, Dr. David Spiro, where we explore stories of physicians and folks in healthcare and really try to understand the human nature of the crazy world that we live in. And I am incredibly honored today to have Dr. David Shapiro. Again, I'm David Spiro, not Shapiro. And David, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to call you that because that way we won't get anybody confused, right?
Yeah, so I don't know. Before we get into your bio, the Spiro Shapiro thing, I heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard there was a cow, and the Spiros and the Shapiros sort of got into a fight over a cow back in Mother Russia. And since then, the Spiros and the Shapiros have not really gotten along. Is there anything from the Shapiro side that you want to bring to the table around this?
Well, I thought that the cow story was in Pennsylvania, not in Mother Russia.
Oh boy.
I have I have studied the name Shapiro, and it goes back millennia,
Uh-huh.
but it's
Uh-huh.
inclusive because Shapiro, Spiro, Sparo, Shapiro, Zapara, they're all the same name, and they're all that very fancy high-level name.
Yeah, but what I've read seriously is Spiro is a derivative of Shapiro. So at one point we were all like one big clan, possibly.
Agreed,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, and would love to start like we do with all of our guests for you to tell us how you got here. Like, what is your background, and what is your specialty, and just tell us about you.
Sure. So my background is I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, a little tiny town of 35,000 people back then, 177 in my high school class. I went off to Boston College. I loved it there. I had every moment of fun that you could possibly imagine in college. But my first year, I was taken by an opportunity to work at a transplant center and do some research. I went from there to going on to surgical residency, to medical school rather, at UConn first, then to surgical residency, and then I went out to Oregon Health Science University for fellowship, where I met a fancy, very cool emergency medicine doc named David Spiro, excuse me. And I came back to Connecticut to be a trauma surgeon, critical care doc, and I'm boarded in general surgery, and that's the specialty trauma is in surgical critical care and palliative care because I really believed in it. I did additional training in the National Patient Safety Foundation's Patient Safety Fellowship and Leadership Fellowship, and then I did a graduate degree at Harvard School of Public Health. All of which I am fascinated by to this day. I'm one of those people who's just dedicated to lifelong learning and really want to do it. I've been the chair of surgery, the vice chair of surgery, the chief of the ICU, chief quality officer, chief medical officer, and now I'm doing both clinical consulting and a few other exciting things that are fun outside of the hospital.
Yeah, before we get into your story, your career is fascinating, and it's so interesting when we think about when we were in medical school. For me, it was 87 to 91 in San Francisco, what I thought I was going to do, and then what I'm doing now. And I don't know about your family history, but I'm the first physician in the family. So I came into medical school kind of black box. And my role model, and one of the reasons why I went into pediatrics, was my pediatrician on Long Island named Stanley Gittleson. And he inspired me to think about being a physician even when I was a young child. But it's really not what you think it is until you start doing it. And then, like you, I've pivoted, but your career has pivoted and changed and grown. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that fair to say in terms of your career?
I think the pivot is one of the keys to surviving in healthcare. And if you don't know how to pivot or don't want to pivot, that's okay. But you have to realize that you're going to hit some barriers. And if you don't pivot, you're just going to be slamming your head into a wall. When I was a kid, all I wanted to do was become a pediatric cardiologist because my sister was born with transposition. She had a
Mm.
doctor, her name Bill Hellenbrand, who was I still revere his name to this day. I will always
When
bow.
you talk about transposition, your sister was born with switching of
No,
the
yeah, this is where
main arteries of the vessel
this
of the
is where
heart.
the left
Yeah.
part of the heart pumps blood to the lungs and the right part pumps blood to the body, which is not what it's meant to do. It's reversed. It's a congenital problem that happens, and there's a series of surgeries that she underwent back then. Nowadays is fixed with a very different surgery and a very effective long-term surgery, but they deal with their own problems. So it's one of those things in medicine. Medicine pivots. We do it because people change, think genetics change, evolution occurs in short spurts with certain things, and we understand how to do things more. But then I hit that college job and I was fascinated by transplant. I really wanted to do it from the beginning. My mentors, I had a mentor who was named David Hull, who was a transplant surgeon in Connecticut, and he was one of those very matter of fact people, and you didn't question him, you just did it. And he said, Shapiro, come with me. And I would just do it. No matter what I was doing, you'd do it. And I was operating on a variety of things in the operating room that I probably shouldn't have been at that age, but I was. And then I met my another mentor named Joe Savetta, who people may know in the medical world because the textbook of surgical critical care was Savetta and Kirby. And now it's Kirby since Savetta had died. But he's one of those people that told me, you do what's good for you. Don't do what's good for other people. And that's what,
That's an
according to
interesting frame. That's a very
career. Well,
interesting frame.
that was career.
Yeah. So, you brought up another point, which is that I am imagining in your career and mine, which are almost similar crossover, but different training tracks. You're a combination of all the people that have mentored you. You're who you are today, showing up in this podcast, is some amalgamation of all of those mentors that influenced you along the way.
You used a very important word to me, and that's mentor. And the evolution of who is important to you that you follow along, whether it's someone that inspired you, they're an inspiration. Someone who mentored you and pushed you forward, someone who sponsored you, which is kind of a newer word in the last 15 years. That's the person who really opens doors and pulls you in. But to me, this is about being a beacon. And I don't, it's not an arrogant thing for me to say this. There's always someone that you want to be like who's not someone you know. And sometimes you have to go find them. Sometimes you have to go see them. And sometimes you have to just ask. And I talk about the Lord of the Rings because I'm a complete nerd. But if you remember the lighting of the beacon in the Lord of the Rings, that was to signal that someone needed help. So if you're a student or learner or someone who's going into medicine or wants to go into medicine and you don't know what avenue to take, you have to look out there for people that are reaching out to you. And that includes people who may not be in the same specialty you're interested in. It may be people who are different race, different heritage, different ethnicity, different LGBT status. We have an organization that does this to pull people who are LGBT into surgery because it's it wasn't a friendly specialty for a long time. That's
Interesting.
being a beacon.
Well, but I knew this was going to happen because the intro is only supposed to be 2 minutes, and now we're 7 or 8 minutes into the podcast. So no, it's okay. When two Jewish boys from wherever get together, we start chit chatting. But before we get into the story, getting back to the Spiro Shapiro thing, one of the most annoying things for me is that when I meet someone for the first time, they'll repeat my name back as David Shapiro, and sometimes I'm called David Shapiro. Do you, as David Shapiro, ever get called David Spiro? Or does that not
So
happen?
I usually get called David Shapiro because
Mm,
someone has melded the Spiro, Shapiro name together. There is a David Spiro who's a surgeon in town, and I sometimes get confused for him, but most of the time people just call me Shapiro. And I'm one of the I think you're the same, as you're one of those people that's referred to by your full name quite often. Oh, I know David Spiro. I know David Spiro. I know Dave Shapiro. I get called that all the time. So it's not as confusing when you have the SH.
yeah. People at work, like my colleagues, sometimes will refer to me as Spiro, which is interesting because that's what my camp name was. And it's all interesting. Anyway, so I want to get back to your story because again, human medicine is we whatever you're doing, whether it's whatever profession you're involved in, legal, healthcare, etc. We learn from telling stories, and so I would love to hear the story that you want to bring to our audience today, David.
Sure. So this is the story I want to tell is something that guided me towards helping people. In the long run, you're going to hear that it turned me into a trauma surgeon, but I didn't know that back then. Having grown up in this cute little bucolic New England town that was very New England, with a big wide avenue of Main Street. 6 lanes, well, 4 lanes across, plenty of parking and lots of space. And my family had a department store in town. And while that department store closed in the mid to late 80s, because department stores closed back then. Um, I was working for a restaurant. And it's one of those things that when you're young and you want to do something in medicine and you look for a job, you find what's there. You don't find much. I was a busboy at a restaurant. I was a bar back and I was helping out. And this town had this big sidewalk festival that had been around for about 40 years, and it was something the store always participated in. At this point, the store was closed. And I was walking on Main Street. One of the first years we didn't have to work at the family store because it was closed. And I was going to my job later, so I had my crappy old car that I was had parked around the corner and was just walking around the street because it was a beautiful summer day and it was ready for it. And I um I was walking in front of what was then a Woolworths. It was a old appliance store. And I remember distinctly, like I can still hear this happening in my brain, um, a scuffle, kind of an interaction, a gasp from a woman, um, a what the heck from somebody else. And about, 10 feet away, maybe 8 feet away from me, a man was on the ground doing this with a knife. And he was stabbing someone. And
Oh my
people were
gosh.
starting to run away from this. And I was in a variety.
This is in the middle of the day, like in
There
the
were
middle of
hundreds of people around. He
in a department store,
and outside on the street, so there was a
outside
few
on the
people
street, but in the middle
uh,
of
middle of
whatever's
all the
going on.
fest. Imagine a big fair with sales all around you, everyone just having a wonderful time eating and drinking and doing all the things. And this was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he jumped on someone and started stabbing them. And he had it later learned few moments later, it learned it was a little girl and her mother was just standing in horror, and everyone around was scattering. There was a local off-duty police officer who basically tackled the guy, and a local nurse who was just a bystander. And I was there because I was a kid just wondering what was going on. And I'd also been, interesting, I was also a police explorer. If people don't know what police explorers are, it's the cadet version or it's a scouting, it's a part of USA Scouting, but it's meant for people interested in police, fire, and that sort of thing. And I had noticed something and I ran towards it because that's what I was trained to do. And I went in and saw this girl was bleeding very heavily. And so I happened to have
Where was she bleeding from?
everywhere. She had 70 something stab wounds on her body.
My gosh. Oh my.
And I hope that I'm not violating someone's privacy in this because I won't say any names, but it's a very, it's a very known story. And she was dying in front of us and bleeding to death. And I distinctly remember the steps that were happening where I had bought a t-shirt and I pulled the t-shirt out and I started using it to hold pressure. And the nurse was doing things trying to make sure that her airway was open and that she was breathing and checking her pulse and finding none and starting to do CPR on her. And other people were trying to help, but most people didn't know what to do. And the man was then tackled. Police were called. People responded pretty quickly, but and I'll digress to a moment where years later, after this event occurred, I was asked if I had any injuries. I didn't. I had none. I went to work. I washed my hands, and I just went to the job. And a few moments later, after I arrived, the city mayor walked in, sat at the bar, and had a shot of whiskey. And I could see him just crying. And I start getting emotional when I think about this moment because you see that real people have real emotion. Um, Years later, when I was a first year medical student. I was at a local, I don't know, I think it was the Jewish Community Center of Greater Hartford, and Sherwin Newland was giving a book signing. If you don't know Sherwin Newland, he's a great author. He wrote a book called The Doctors about, he left women out, but he wrote a great book about doctors and history of who's contributed to the medical profession. He also wrote a book called How We Die, and a second book called The Wisdom of the Body, which was later retitled as How We Live. In the book How We Die, I was reading it, and this is going from 1980 something to 1998 when I was a first year medical student, reading the book and approaching this one chapter about accidental death and traumatic death, and reading this passage saying um, that this local town nearby had a man who jumped on a child and stabbed her, and the mother saw her die and saw the life leave her eyes, and that was a description of how this child died as a result of bleeding to death. And that she had a moment of release and things that had happened in her body just made her not there anymore. and he interviewed her mother, and there was it was a beautiful tale. No matter how horrible it was a beautiful way of describing it. But I asked him, I said to him, I waited, I made sure that I was last in line at the book signing, got to the front, and I said, I just want to ask you a question. My name is David Shapiro. I'm doing this. I'd love you to sign my book, but I want to know, can you share with me, is this story the same story of what I experienced? And he wouldn't tell me, but he wrote in my book, and I still have the book, and it says, to David Shapiro, my colleague, please continue to save lives. And that was just, it was a moment for me. It was beautiful, and I
Mm.
felt horrible for this family. And you go back and look, and it's in the news every year or two, because the guy gets some not parole but release possibility, and the family opposes it. And it's horrible to see that when I was 16 years old, and now I'm 52, and I don't do math, but that's, 34, 36 years ago. This is trauma that still affects people, and it still affects that family
So,
especially.
so let's talk about that for a second. So, we've shared on the show with some other guests as emergency medicine providers. In my field, I do experience death in children from time to time, and I know in your work you've experienced quite a bit of death since this unfortunate incident with the girl while you were a busboy. But I'd like to get back to that moment when you cleaned up and then you went to work. Do you remember what you were thinking about and how you may have processed that as a 16-year-old child experiencing such a traumatic experience?
I remember processing it probably very unhealthily at the time, because I went to work, and I had to do my job, and I had to go home, and I had all those things that happened. But this was when I was 16, and when I
Which
was
is, by the way, what we do in emergency medicine. We have a bad event, and then we have to sort of compartmentalize it and go to room 7.
you put it in your
Yeah,
pocket for later.
yeah, yeah.
And I will, it reminds me of a story that I'll share with you, a brief story about a resident who had to deal with this kind of thing at one point, and I helped him through. Uh, that compartmentalization is important when you control it. It's not, I wouldn't say it's dangerous, but I don't think it's safe to compartmentalize it when you don't know what you're doing. Because I was 16 years old. 5 years before, my sister, who had that congenital heart disorder, died when I was 11 years old.
I'm so
And
sorry.
she had that experience her entire life of being a patient, and that was chronic illness. That was chronic disease, and she wound up having just a lot of bad problems happen because of, she was in Rochester, Minnesota at one point, and coming, it was a lot of things going on, and things in medicine that just don't work as well. But this was a kid who was there, who was healthy, who didn't have any woes, no challenges, was in school, was ready to take on the world at 8 years old, and her life was taken from her. And if I have to have a moment, I sit down, I go read that chapter of his book, and I remember that moment in my mind because I don't want to forget it. And a lot of people, I think, grieve for loved ones or for people they don't know. And I do as a trauma surgeon, as a critical care doc, just like you do as an emergency medicine physician. You grieve for those people that die. But if you grieve and then forget, you lose a little portion of what makes you human. Because death and dying makes you human. Again, the safety is very important. We cannot survive if we dwell on death, but we also can't survive if we don't talk about it. And I'll tell you, I heard and it's not a funny story, but it's a hilarious story about Conan. What's his name? Conan O'Brien, the talk show host. Lost his dad a couple years ago, and then his mom died 2 days later. And he told the story to Will Arnott, one of the other stars of one of the shows. When his dad died, Will texted him and said, "I'm sorry to hear about your dad. My love, all I love from our family to yours." And Conan O'Brien, who was always trying to be funny, responded by saying, "Thank you so much. I think Bateman is responsible. I think Bateman did it." And he was blaming Jason Bateman for the death of his father. And then this went on for a couple days of them having this back and forth because apparently his father would have loved it. But other things that people, and you have to go watch it someday because it goes on and gets darker, but people find ways to escape from that moment. And I did palliative care as well, and I'm boarded it, and I talk about it. I don't practice it anymore, because it was just busy and too much. And there's people who are wonderful at it. But there's a balance between escaping from it and embracing it. And I think those two things exist together, just like anything else has a spectrum.
Those are wise words. So, what do you do now as a mentor with younger learners and younger residents who you work with when they experience death? And what advice do you give them, and how do you support them in your role in as a leader?
It's a very personal and experiential phenomenon to do this. I don't think that there's a technique behind it other than being aware, listening, asking if someone needs to sit and talk, or asking if they need time out for a moment. I did have an experience where one very experienced, very exceptional resident was extremely upset. And he's not someone who showed emotion much, was very positive, was a very great person, and is a very successful physician now. But we had a resuscitation where an older man was found down, came in talking and alert, and then had a cardiac arrest in the trauma room. And, we don't do certain things when someone has a unknown source of their cardiac arrest. We didn't find a reason. And after about 40 minutes of trying to figure out what's going on and resuscitate this man, the man died. And you could see his face was not accepting of this. Usually there's a nod. We have I don't know if your emergency department does this, but we have a moment where I always say in the middle of a trauma, we're running out of options. Does anyone have any ideas? Please share them.
Same,
And I've had
same thing,
the
same thing.
medic share, the chaplain share, the nurse, everyone has the free reign to say something. And then we have a moment of silence if someone dies. And we remember that they died because, not because we failed, they died because they died. And we have to remember we can learn something from this. When he left the room, I could see the welling up in his eyes, and I'd never seen him respond this way before. And this just goes to show you that you don't know what event will change someone's experience. So when you notice something, in the old see something, say something, if someone who is learning and in that position because they're there to be exposed to the great parts of medicine, see a death and they're not ready for it, then they may get upset. And you can sit with them, you can talk to them, you can have them leave the room, you can do all those things, but you have to be present for their moment. And you have to let them be as present or as non-present as they want to be.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'll share with you a little experience around giving bad news lately as a fellow nice Jewish boy. Is I work in the Deep South now, so I work in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Little Rock's a blue dot, but it's a pretty red state, and even in Little Rock, it's a pretty religious community from a Christian standpoint. And I unfortunately diagnosed a child with a mass in the brain stem in the ED, where they came in with one thing that they thought was pretty benign, and 2 or 3 hours later, we had a pretty serious situation to discuss with the family. And I was in a quiet room, which I'm sure you've been in countless times with families, and I was with the mother and the father and two grandfathers, which is unusual because usually it's grandmothers and not grandfathers in the pediatric world. So one of the grandfathers was a, a pastor, a minister in their church. They were from a small town in Arkansas. And so after I gave the bad news, there was some crying from the parents, and we talked a little bit about, next steps, etc. And the grandfather looked at me and he said, Dr. Spiro, will you pray with us? And I said, absolutely. And there was a chaplain in the room, by the way, because as with your experience, you said we often have um, incredible chaplains who volunteer and or work and thankless job. They're usually very, very wonderful people. So it was chaplain, really awesome person. And we all sort of came to the middle of the room. We joined hands of these people that I'd never met before, 3 hours before, and and he said a beautiful prayer, and in the Christian tradition, and I just experienced it all, and I didn't break down, I didn't cry, but I felt one of the most beautiful connections that I've had with a family after giving bad news that I ever have had. So I bring that story up because that affected me. And what you said earlier is such a wise comment, which is that it's a balance, right? It's a balance between feeling it and also being somewhat clinical. It's both. It's an and, not an or. And when you stop feeling it, you're probably not in the right field anymore, and you need to sort of move on. And the good news is I'm still feeling it, man. I really am still feeling it, and get to experience these beautiful moments of what I call heroes. And so, thank you for sharing
Fantastic.
that story.
Do you have a? Can I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
So
No,
you,
no questions.
I'm going to
This is
ask.
what happens when a Shapiro's on. It gets very, very personal.
It's a good one.
Good.
This
Go
is
ahead.
one for those folks out there too.
Go ahead.
Someone once asked me if I have a ritual when I want to experience the sad or experience the. And I said at first I said no. I just if I listen to a horrible song when I'm on the way home, it makes me just burst out into tears, and that's then that'll happen. But when it was actually someone where we were working together that
Mm,
asked me that question.
mm.
And I think it was the palliative care director. I won't mention his name, but who was at then because there was a young child who was brought in after somebody backed a car into her, and it was one of my first times ever doing attending work because I was a new attending
I
there.
actually think I was there for that.
You were there for that, and I remember
I
there
remember it
there
very
were people
clearly.
related to the hospital, and their family
I
was
remember.
present, and
Yeah.
it was a horrible experience, and we tried everything, and we couldn't do it. And I found afterwards a door to the roof to walk outside. I had to be outside. It was very cold. It was very dark because we had tried to do things for a few hours. I remember being up there and just being so upset and bawling my eyes out and not knowing what to do because I was unsure. This is the first death I experienced as an attending, and I dried my eyes, went back inside, I went downstairs and did my paperwork, and then I was probably around 7 a.m. then, and he came and found me because I'd done a rotation with him, and he said to me, "I heard what happened last night. I want to make sure that you're okay because this is something that we should do for each other, is asking, are you okay? Anything you need? Do you need to talk? Not can we talk, but do you need to talk?" And then I talked to him for a couple minutes and I thanked him for that. We had had moments of discussion about palliative care in the past, but he asked me, "Do you have a ritual?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Do you have a ritual that you practice when something upsets you that makes you not necessarily feel better, but feel like you've experienced it?" And from that moment on, I did. So I found, music moments, art outside, those forest baths people talk about. I found a way to do that for myself, and it gave me strength to go out and do that. And I like to experience my grief by myself. I don't like to be around 35 people doing it. So, despite the fact that people think I'm a big introvert, there are some things you have to be big extrovert, excuse me, there are things you have to be introverted about, and that was my introversion moment. So I found a ritual and it worked. But I think the important part for that story is that this person who I barely knew found me because he had heard this happened overnight. He came and sought me out and checked on me. That's what being a mentor, sponsor, beacon, supporter does. It's someone who is there for you when you don't necessarily know that you need them.
Yeah, that's what the Yiddish word for that is probably mensch,
I think
which
you're right.
is it's hard to describe in English, but someone who what's the best way to describe mensch? Someone who does something that is above and beyond, like a good human being. What's the what's your definition of mensch?
A person who has
Mensch.
Yep, MENSCH, yes.
SCH.
It's a
Yeah.
person who has so much integrity about who they are and what they do that they help you through it when you can't find your own.
Yeah, I think you had said you were a chief quality officer and then a CMO and overseeing lots of different physicians and lots of different specialties. And we have a CMO at Arkansas Children's who is just a a woman who is a mensch, and there's a job description of what you do as CMO, and then there's the reality of it. And the good people who are in leadership and medicine are those beacons, right? They're the people who actually find the David Shapiros after an event like that, or reach out or check in. Um, uh, that's part of the human experience of what we do, in some ways.
Agree. Totally.
So, what we're going to wrap this up in a few minutes. You right now said that you're doing some consulting work. What do you think you'll be doing for the next couple years of your life, as you're sort of right now in a little bit of a pivoting moment? What is inspiring you in healthcare that uh, needs David Shapiro?
Ooh, that is it's a tough question because yeah, after, I started looking for jobs immediately because I'd never been without one before. When I left this institution, and I left it for good reasons. But what I found was that there were so many people asking me to work for them or with them that I didn't have to go too far to find work. And I found it very exciting to see that people were talking about things like AI and medicine, AI and surgery, AI and diagnostics, AI and this, AI and that. Fantastic. Great. I'm not an expert in AI. I know it. I understand it. I'm fascinated by it. My partner understands it better than I do. Um, I'm also fascinated by the world of the payers who have become focused on quality instead of focused. Well, some of them have become focused on quality, some of them have not. And I've been looking around, and I've gotten a couple inquiries asking if I wanted to come work for this organization, et cetera. What I want to be able to do is affect the most people that I can in the most positive way. So I will tell you that one of the other things I do for the American College of Surgeons is I'm the incoming leader for the Stop the Bleed program. And I'm trying to use that program, which teaches the lay public how to respond to a bleeding emergency. You probably know it because people know it around the world, and I hope the listeners know of it. But it's supposed to be taught for free. It's easy to learn, and it's something that can affect lots of people. I think the exciting part there is that there's so much that goes into the chain of survival from an event or the diagnosis when something happens, especially in accidents and injuries, to the fix that can prevent the death, that I want to be the person who helps at one of those stages in between. And there's a dozen things that I'm trying to figure out which I want to do the most, and you'll hear more. Maybe you'll have me back sometime and I can talk about the
Well,
next.
I'm definitely having you back. It's funny because when I asked you to tell a story, you gave me a list of 5 or 6 things that you could chat about. So I think there are probably 5 or 6 times we can have you back. David Letterman had Howard Stern on lots throughout the
He did.
career, and
He was
so
great on it too.
I love watching them interact back and forth. Well, I usually end and asking the guest on the show here, thinking about the last 30 minutes of our discussion, besides the Spiro Shapiro controversies that we really never solved. What would you say is sort of the learning point that you would like to share to some of our learners who are in healthcare or thinking about going into healthcare?
I think if you're a learner if you're in medical school, aspiring for medical school, or in residency and or fellowship, and you're moving towards your goal, the single most important thing that you can do for yourself is the same thing you do every day in medicine, but instead of trying to diagnose and figure it out, learn from the people that are around you. And I don't mean this in the gentle, soft medicine way. I mean it. What other things do they have deep inside that they can tell you about? And it may be them talking to you. And I'll give you a very short story. I was a medical student on the palliative care service when I was a fourth year medical student, and I happened to be present when this man was actively dying. All he wanted, all he wanted was a Diet Coke. And the hospital didn't serve Diet Coke, they had Diet Pepsi, and all he wanted was a Diet Coke. And I thought it was be nice if I just grabbed him a Diet. So I grabbed a Diet Coke on the way in one day, and he he saw it from me, and he bawled because he had no family left, He didn't think anyone was going to advocate for him. And I just learned that sometimes you have to listen to the other things other than the white cell count, the diagnostic report from radiology, the physical findings on your exam, and listen to what's going on inside their head, inside their chest, and know what's going on in their mind and ask them, how are you? And it's the same thing we do for our residents, learners, students, and colleagues. Um, are you okay? Anything you need? We did this a little bit during COVID. I don't think we did it enough. We didn't reach out to the people that were behind the scenes enough, and we have the opportunity to do that. So do it.
Are you okay asking those questions, listening to the patient? That's a human to human connection.
It really is.
And there is an old adage in medicine that is simply listen to the patient. Listen to the patient, and he or she will tell you what you need to know. So
Agreed.
I always talk a little bit about, or I'll ask young learners when I'm working with them, what is the core of healthcare? What's the core of medicine? What is the key aspect of what all of this that we're doing? Folks give me lots of answers, but the answer that I'm looking for is bidirectional communication. Listening and being able to articulate your thoughts and feelings is the key aspect of everything we do. And really, it pervades way more than medicine. It pervades our relationships and with the people we love and our friends and our colleagues. And wow, this journey of human medicine on some meta level has brought me together with people that I don't know or my paths have crossed. And I work with a wonderful medical student, one of my favorite medical students, Maya Roberts, who's now one of the docs at Google. And she's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks. And I can't wait to have her and David Shapiro. It was an incredible honor to have you on the show, and I will definitely ask you to come back again if you have the time once you get to your next gig and what you end up doing in life. And thank you for your time today.
I'll make the time for you anytime. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled. Appreciate it.
All right, listeners, thank you for joining. If you're seeing us on YouTube, please subscribe, and also Apple Podcast or Spotify, or wherever you digest your, and one last thing as I'm wrapping it up, next time, can you wear the bow tie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a request. Let's just put that down. Okay.
I wore my OHSU type outfit today.
Excellent. So, and I still have my OHSU vest, so maybe we'll do OHSU at one point, and maybe we'll do bow ties. I have a bow tie from a friend of mine. I never wear it. But anyway, thank you all for listening, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to HeMed with David Spiro, MD. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. The video versions are also available on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell there so that you never miss a future episode.